Video by Emmanuel Isaiah Smith.
Hello, good afternoon, and thank you for watching. It is your host, Emmanuel Isaiah Smith, and today's date is Thursday, December 11th, 2025. The time is 4:10 p.m., and I'm in Miami, Florida. The topic of today's lecture is Gangstalking and Domestic Terrorism. And I'll let you know, ladies and gentlemen, I tend to do these lectures outdoors, so I may have to project or raise my voice from time to time to drown out the background noise. Please adjust your volumes accordingly. I would like to begin this lecture, ladies and gentlemen, by addressing a certain matter. There is apparently a system of deliberate clumsiness, as it were, that appears to follow around targeted persons. Now, when I say targeted persons, ladies and gentlemen, the only targeted persons I have to draw from in that capacity are myself and my significant other. Now, she experiences a lot of the same kinds of synchronization that I experience. And for a woman to have to endure that in a synchronous fashion, oftentimes at the hands of male perpetrators, is beyond disturbing. Okay? Now, when we talk about deliberate clumsiness, you're talking about people who get around myself and her and act as if they cannot handle themselves physically, keep their footing, keep their balance, operate their vehicle properly, or operate their scooter, bicycle, or moped properly, causing either a collision into me and her or a near collision into me and her. It would be the equivalent as if you, as a stalker, were given a signal to go and not only pester a person, but to make physical contact with him or her. If you wanted to do it in such a way so that it doesn't look like assault, you might walk up to him or her, perhaps on a flight of stairs, or perhaps as they're walking down the street, or perhaps as they're exiting a building or entering a building, and upon getting your signal, you approach that person and act as if you have tripped or slipped so that you can collide into that person without arousing suspicion of an assault. You got people doing this stuff to people in vehicles, all right, acting as if they didn't see you, acting as if they didn't sense you, acting as if they just simply had no clue that you were there, and collide into you with a vehicle and drive off. Let me tell you something, ladies and gentlemen. There is a FBI statistic, and the FBI is the Federal Bureau of Investigation. There is an FBI statistic, ladies and gentlemen. It says that any pedestrian, or any person, period, You don't have to be walking. You could be doing anything. You could be sitting in a parking lot sipping on an orange soda somewhere. It doesn't matter. Regardless of who you are or what it is you do, a person is 50 times more likely to get hit by a car in the state of Florida than any other state. I'll repeat that, ladies and gentlemen. A person is 50 times more likely to experience a car collision or a hit and run here in the state of Florida, more so than any other state. That's 50 times more likely in the state of Florida. What does that say about the state of Florida? Now, on its face, the average person, the typical person, the everyday person would hear a statistic like that and say, well, what that statistic says to me is that the state of Florida has the worst drivers anywhere in the country. That's what that statistic says to me. That's what most people would say. But, you know what? I'm not necessarily saying that. I'm not necessarily saying that. There are horrible drivers in Florida, but I've lived in Ohio, Florida, and Tennessee. I've encountered horrible drivers in Ohio and Tennessee as well. How can you tell a horrible driver? Well, there's only two ways. You can look at their driving record, or you can do it the old-fashioned way and just watch how they drive or observe their driving habits. If a person has many points on their driving record, on their license, or if they've experienced suspensions, or if they've had DUIs or DWIs, or if they've had automobile collisions in the buildings and the establishments and so forth, or perhaps they have charges on their background like vehicular manslaughter or something to that effect, you could reasonably deduce, well, not even deduce, you could reasonably gather from these kinds of driving statistics that that person is a bad driver, period. Because they're causing collisions, they're harming people, okay? They're putting themselves and others at risk in a vehicle. And they are essentially ticking time bombs with respect to the next collision or accident they cause. All right? Now, if a person doesn't have any points on their license, or if a person doesn't have any DWIs or DUIs or anything of the sort, you could reasonably gather from those statistics that they're a good driver. But there's no way to measure, in particular, who is an aggressive driver. All right? You can be an aggressive driver and not have any points on your license if you've never caused a collision. You could be deemed an aggressive driver and have a crystal clean criminal background. You could have a crystal clean driving record. You could have a wonderful job, a nice family, a beautiful home, a beautiful car. But when you hit the road, you know how to drive aggressively so as to make the people around you uncomfortable or jittery or nervous or aggressive themselves. Why? Maybe you think it's a thrilling adventure to hop into your motor vehicle, turn it on, put your seatbelt on or not, and go out into American streets with a very thuggish mindset on your driving abilities and your driving habits. Now, if you happen to come across a person who is an aggressive driver, okay, and they do it well, okay, they're a skilled aggressive driver, all right, they're not the kind of aggressive driver that goes out and crashes through someone's living room in their vehicle, all right, they're not the kind of driver that's going to drive down the street, run up on a curve, and crash through the front door of an elementary school in your neighborhood. All right? They're not the kind of driver that's going to ram a pickup truck through the front door of a church. All right? That's not what they do. Aggressive drivers are skilled at being aggressive drivers. Aggressive drivers can drive aggressively and not cause an accident at all. They know just how to run you off the road, or they know just how to swipe or run past you, just missing you by inches, or they know just how to throw you off balance as they speed off in their car. You got people that have gotten very good at being aggressive drivers. And as the two pricks that just cut me off as I was walking down the sidewalk in vehicles, particularly corresponding to Southwest 8th Street and Southwest 33rd Avenue, right next to the Nissan dealer here in Miami-Dade, Florida, as I walk, I had two gang stalkers just cut me off in their cars. And they did it out of a sense of, they did it with sort of a sense of urgency, like cutting me off as soon as I got to the crosswalk and not a second sooner or later. Was something that they had to do in order to get back home to their families tonight. All right, some gang stalkers have that sense of urgency to where if they don't cut this person off or zoom past this person in a car or zoom past this person in a truck or zoom past this person in some sort of a commercial vehicle or almost cause a collision or cause a collision or run somebody over or do a hit and run or knock somebody's block off with their van, okay, they act as if they do not do these things, that they're not going to be able to make it home to their families that night. They make it look as if they have to do these things, otherwise some force will stop them from going home to their families that night. You see, they do it out of such a sense of urgency and commitment. I mean, they act like total thugs in these vehicles with such a sense of urgency and commitment that you'd think that if they miss their assignment of either causing an accident or nearly causing an accident, that they won't be able to go home to their families that night. All right? It's intentional clumsiness. If one of these pieces of trash were to run somebody over in their vehicle, okay, they have every excuse in the world as to why that happened. Okay, I was distracted. I didn't see him. I was looking down. I was answering my phone. I was doing this. I was doing that. No, those are lies. All right, a gang stalker has no problem with killing a person so long as they get a signal to do it. It doesn't matter if it's in a vehicle. It doesn't matter if it's with their hands. It doesn't matter if it's with some blunt instrument. It doesn't matter if it's with a chemical. It doesn't matter if it's a disease they use to kill the person with. It doesn't matter if it's a firearm. A gang stalker gets very excited. They probably get sexually excited when the opportunity to kill somebody comes their way. All right, there are people out there where the thought of murdering somebody or the thought of seeing somebody get murdered turns them on sexually. A lot of these stalkers that I see, these operatives, these liaisons, the ones that drive so aggressively that they're nearly running over and killing men, women, and children because they took some goofy signal in their car from another motorist or a pedestrian or some other signal. Okay? They probably get sexually aroused at the thought of potentially killing somebody with a vehicle. All right? That's what I think about these stalkers. I mean, I have psychoanalyzed gang stalkers up and down. Okay, so much so that I could boast a PhD in psychology, a PhD in sociology with a focus on human behavior. All right, a PhD in neuroscience. All right, that's how much I have. That's how much I've psychoanalyzed gang stalkers. Okay, I can't psychoanalyze them anymore. The only thing I can say in addition to the psychoanalysis that I've suggested and will continue to suggest is that a lot of people do gang stalking because it gives them a sexual rush. All right, maybe one of these stalkers' love life is not going right at home. Okay, him and his wife, their romantic flame, okay, has begun to diminish. And we're not talking after 54 years of marriage when your physical urges change. We're talking right now. We're talking in their primes, in their sexual primes. A lot of these gang stalkers are in about the age range where you would consider them in their sexual prime. A lot of these gang stalkers are sexually deprived because their life at home, okay, with their wife is not going right. And it's messing with them sexually. And it's messing with them romantically. Okay, when they go home at night, their bed is colder than an ice bucket. All right, a lot of these stalkers and their wives use their kids as scapegoats to not have to speak to one another. Not necessarily saying that their marriage is on the rocks or anything like that. It just makes me think, and indeed I've come to the realization that a lot of these stalkers, the ones that take these signaling disruption assignments, they might be doing it to get away from their wives because they have no chemistry there or anything to that effect, or there might be something going on with respect to him and his wife at home, not necessarily clicking, not necessarily getting along, not necessarily on the verge of divorce, but their sex life is not exactly fireworks either, that type of deal. And these guys are walking away from their wife and kids and saying, hey, listen, I'm going out for a while, just taking a drive. And, I'll be back later. And then you go out signaling and using gang stalking maneuvers on people to try and build your self-confidence. Build your self-confidence and maybe get some of your mojo back. You guys remember that movie Austin Powers, The International Man of Mystery? It was a hugely popular show or movie back in the late 90s and early 2000s. It starred Mike Myers and Elizabeth Hurley in the titular roles in that movie. All right, Austin Powers played a British spy who was constantly the subject of hijinks and shenanigans. But he was also he was what they call hypersexual or ultrasexual, where they have libidos that just go on forever. And at some point he lost his libido. And he said he lost his mojo. And he had to go on an adventure to find his mojo back so he could use it on his wife or whoever. You know, that was a funny movie. All right. And it was kind of the opposite of another very popular series, the James Bond 007 series, which is originated in England as well. Very good show. It's endured through the ages. I think that Austin Powers was supposed to be sort of the antithesis of James Bond. The original James Bond. And I believe that it just explores interesting themes. But a lot of these gang stalkers have lost their mojo, ladies and gentlemen. A lot of these stalkers, the ones I'm seeing, you know, who knows? Maybe it's the pressures of life. Maybe it's dissatisfaction at work. Maybe it's a midlife crisis, or maybe it's a late life crisis or an early life crisis. Who knows? Gang stalkers are full of crises. They have a capacity to become sexually frustrated. And, you know, the way a lot of these stalkers act around animals, it almost makes me think a few of them are attracted to beasts like dogs or cats or rabbits, fish, goats, hamsters, ferrets, iguanas. A lot of these stalkers I'm seeing look bestial. All right, and a lot of what they do is obviously out of sexual frustration. I know me personally, if I had a loving wife and a nice job and a good family at home, all right, if I was able to live prosperously in any state in the country, and I pretty much had my future set financially and so forth, there's no way in hell I'd be some flustered, half-drained stalker walking around. I'd be enjoying time with my wife. I'd be enjoying time with my kids. I'd be enjoying time doing the things that I like to do and making my future more secure and that of my family. But not stalkers. They got more hang-ups than Jeffrey Epstein. And that man's not even alive no more. So I say this, ladies and gentlemen, these stalkers, okay, this intentional clumsiness, all right, where they're trying to injure people under the guise of just being aloof or negligent, that's just as violent as going out into the street and simply finding people to attack with weapons or vehicles. All right, you stalkers ain't gonna put that garbage off on me, and you're not gonna put that garbage off on my significant other either. I see right through that you do. And quite frankly, I think it's disgusting. All right? You're intentionally harming people, making it look like an accident. And it's disgusting and it's violent. And if somebody were to attack you back in self-defense, you could say, this person attacked me for no reason. Then the person could say, no, I did attack you for a reason because you attacked me first. Then the stalker would say, no, I didn't attack you. I just happened to trip over an apple that was laying on the sidewalk and it made me collide into you. Or I just happened to trip up the stairs on the county bus and collided into you. Or I just happened to slip and fall and twist and turn over a chair at the county library and bump into you. Or I happened to tiptoe up a flight of stairs and didn't see you, stubbed my toe, and then bumped into you on that flight of stairs. Those weren't on purpose. Those weren't intentional. Yes, they were, and it is gang stalking. All right? These stalkers have attempted or possibly mastered the art of being able to do damage to people physically, psychologically, personally, and occupationally under the guise of either following protocol, following procedure, or an accident. Now, ladies and gentlemen, you know, I've called gang stalkers weasels in the past. This is why. Because they do stuff like this. All right? A weasel tries to harm a person and make it look like an accident. Right? Or they try to harm a person behind closed doors. Right? So, ladies and gentlemen, just be aware, be careful. If you see somebody stumbling around, stay away from them. They might be a gang stalker looking to take signals to crash into people and make it look like an accident. You can do somebody grievous harm by colliding into them, even if it's physically. Even if I, quote, accidentally slip on a blade of grass that's laying in the middle of a street and collide into you, causing you and me both to fall. All right? That can cause grievous injury to a person. And likewise in your vehicles, where you try to act like, oh, that collision was an accident, or me running those people over was an accident, or me bumping into that person was an accident, or me crashing into this person was an accident, or me knocking this person 20 feet into the air, that's an accident. No, it's not an accident. It's attempted vehicular manslaughter, you idiot. And a lot of you busters are doing this to women. You probably get sexual gratification from it. I'm going to go out and stalk a woman today. I'm going to look for signals to pester a woman today. I'm going to try to swerve my 5,000-pound vehicle in front of a woman today. That's going to make me real hot and bothered, and I can go home tonight and show my wife the ropes. But unfortunately for a lot of you stalkers, you could swerve in front of 25 or 30 women in your 5,000-pound vehicle. You're going to go home, and you still ain't going to get the job done with your wife. And you know what? If a lot of you stalkers, the ones that I know do this stuff, were standing here right in front of me, I'd look you right in your damn face and say what I'm saying now over the internet. And I'm going to leave it there as far as the introduction to this program, which is domestic terrorism and gang stalking. And ladies and gentlemen, this lecture is going to run over the 1 hour mark. I oftentimes keep my lectures within the 1 hour time frame, although I have seen an uptick in gang stalking activity recently, so there will be an uptick in the length of my lectures. So this one will run over the 1 hour mark. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for watching. So let's talk about domestic terrorism and gang stalking. So what is domestic terrorism? First and foremost, domestic terrorism is when a person who is a sovereign citizen of a city, state, municipality, or country commits an act of terrorism in their own country. All right? Now, don't get me wrong, ladies and gentlemen. Terrorism is terrorism. I don't think any particular kind of terrorism is worse or better than the other kind of terrorism. All right, domestic terrorism is when a person commits an act of terror in their own country. You commit an act of terror in your own country, that's an act of domestic terrorism. If you commit an act of terrorism in another country, that's called foreign terrorism. Now, I'm not here to say or imply that domestic terrorism or foreign terrorism are better or worse than either. You see, they're both cataclysmic events that a person decides to perpetrate against society. Sorry, 1 second, ladies and gentlemen, I have to light a cigarette. From time to time, I smoke during my lectures. So, when you're talking about the trajectory of the American social experiment over the past 150 years, okay? The protocols of domestic terrorism have they've morphed over the past 150 years. So, for example, 150 years ago, something like holding up a bank, or what we call today a heist, was about the closest thing to an act of terrorism that a person could experience. And it isn't just useful idiots that do terrorism. Okay, sometimes it's political ideologues or people that have a very strong sense of having been wronged by a state or a government, those are typically the kinds of people that commit terrorist acts. Although, as I've said in previous lectures, now you have the terrorism for sale mechanism here in the United States, in which you can pay somebody to commit a terrorist act. It could be out of revenge, it could be out of spite, it could be out of hatred, it could be out of civil disobedience. But there is a terrorist industry out there now, ladies and gentlemen, that people are exploiting, and that's the next stage of the terroristic evolution. Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about that as we get into domestic terrorism and gang stalking, the evolution of terrorism. So what you have is a situation where 150 years ago, someone robbed a bank. The bank tellers and everyone inside, patrons and employees alike, would consider that a terroristic act because they were all filled with terror as the crime unfolded. Also, there were train robberies where guys would hijack coal trains, coal-powered trains. Those were considered acts of terrorism, although the word terrorism hadn't really caught on in the respect that it has today. You had mob activity in the 1800s as well, ladies and gentlemen. That movie Gang of New York, starring Daniel Day-Lewis and Kate Moss, or Kate Hudson, I can't quite remember which one. It might have been Nicole Kidman. But anyhow, Gangs of New York was a critically acclaimed film, and it showed some of the things that the gangs of the 1800s, particularly in New York, if I'm not mistaken, did to get ahead and to enhance the quality of their lives. Some of the stuff that these gangs used to do in the 1800s was the equivalent of what you might call terrorism today. As the 1960s rolled around and you had the civil rights movement and you had the new Ku Klux Klan appearing, you had the Black Panther Party appearing, you had the American Communist Party appearing, you had various political dissident groups appearing in the 1960s. It was a fad. It was trendy. It was hip. It was dynamic. It was adventurous to be a political dissident. Now, I'm not saying that these weren't real political dissidents. I believe that they were real political dissidents, but there was sort of a trend that was happening in the 1960s in which we saw an explosion of political dissidents. Now, obviously these political dissidents were disrupted by the FBI because the federal establishment wanted them gone, because their views were not seen as on par with the mainstream American or the mainstream American societal way of doing things. So they were disrupted using a program called COINTELPRO Operation Hoodwink, which disrupted the personal lives of the members of all of these political dissident groups so that they were not able to function as members in those political dissident groups. You see, they were disrupted personally, so they couldn't perform occupationally. All right? That is part of what's used in workplace mobbing as well in today's gang stalking world. And that's what we live in. We live in a gang stalking world. All right? You could just as easily change the name of planet Earth, which I'm not sure who named it Earth. I'm going to have to look that up. Who named planet Earth Earth? Anyhow, regardless of who named it or how it was named or what country or government named it, or what team of scientists got together and called this big spinning orb that we live in Earth, there are certain mysteries that need to be uncovered. Not necessarily about how Earth exists or why it exists or how it exists. We already know that. But we could change the name of Earth to Gangstalker World. I don't see any problem with that. I'd vote for it. If it became a measure on a ballot to change the name of planet Earth to Gangstalking World, I'd go along with it. I'd go along with it. I'd vote for it because that's exactly what we live in. All right, it's clandestine gang stalking in an ever-changing world. Beyond the political dissidents, some of which committed acts that some might consider terroristic. You had things like people going over to universities and sniping students from bell towers, and you had deranged college students at various college campuses around the country going on campus with pistols and various other weapons and committing massacres and things like that. You had so many acts that were being perpetrated in the 60s and 70s that a person might call or consider today to be terrorist actions. And then when the 80s and 90s rolled around, you started seeing things like bombings and mass murders and instances of massive violence that became known as terrorism, or terrorism, but also domestic terrorism, because they were being perpetrated by U.S. citizens. And then when 9/11 happened, you saw a whole new brand of terrorism. You saw a whole new brand of terrorism. You saw a plane hijacked and used as a missile to collide into the World Trade Towers. That in itself was considered at that point to be the ultimate act of terrorism. 3,000 killed in a single day because of that act. All right? Many in the American news media said things like, well, these are Arab Muslims doing this, and they're doing it out of spite for the United States and Israel, because they don't like how the United States and Israel have carried about their business in the Middle East. Me personally, I'm of the mindset, okay, my views have changed on this a little bit, okay? I'm of the mindset that when you're talking about the Middle East, now I think the Middle East has stabilized some in the past 5 years. But from 1980 to 2010 in particular, from 1980 to 2020 in particular, that 45-year period, and that's a long time, the Middle East was a very volatile, violent, and hostile part of the world. Okay? There was a lot of violence, okay? Remarkable violence happening in the Middle East. The Arabs saw it as a cooperation between the United States and Israel. The United States and Israel saw it as a cooperation among the jihadists and militants, and the battle raged on. And it still rages on to the present day. And it's difficult to fault Israel for being harsh. It's difficult to fault the United States for being harsh. It's difficult to fault the Palestinians or the Middle Eastern people for feeling slighted. All right? That is a very unstable situation. And I believe that at some point, the United States and Israel will find diplomacy and use it. I believe the Palestinians and the Arabs will find diplomacy and use it, and we'll see a cohesive situation. But until that day happens, for goodness sakes, I would hate to see Hamas or any group get angry at the United States and Israel to the point where it wants to carry out an event like October 7th, which is also considered to be a terroristic act. All right? Hamas militants murdered 1,500 Jews in the streets of Tel Aviv, Israel, if I'm not mistaken. It's been deemed a 9/11 of sorts for Israel. And Israel wanted to return the favor spades. All right? They wanted to leave no stone unturned, and they wanted to let every militant or hostile actor in the Middle East know, if you commit an act like this against Israel, we are going to respond with blood, fire, and boots. All right? Particularly boots on the ground. The Middle East is a very volatile area, okay? You must understand geopolitics to understand what has happened in the Middle East. All right? You must understand that that is a 77-year war that has been raging on. And at the present time, Israel and its allies have the upper hand. That's the nature of war. That's the nature of battle. That's the nature of conflict. There has to be a winner and there has to be a loser. Now, I'm not calling either Israel or the Palestinians winners or losers in this scuffle, but the Israelis and the United States and its allies have the upper hand. And quite frankly, Israel, its actions, it did not cause World War III. And it looks like there's a ceasefire that's coming, that's approaching. And that's a credit to both Israel and the Palestinians. Now, when you talk about gang stalking, what are you talking about? You're talking about a state-sanctioned attack mechanism, a state-sanctioned sabotage mechanism, and a state-sanctioned disruption mechanism. There are a lot of tactics that are used by gang stalkers against targeted persons. A targeted person is someone who at some point in their life has been entered as a targeted person into various federally and private kept databases as someone who deserves to be in a gang stalking campaign. All right? I've often asserted that targeted persons had to have been deemed either truthfully or untruthfully, lawfully or unlawfully, rightly or wrongly, as being subversive to society in some way, or potentially subversive. And gang stalking being a preventative measure of their subversiveness, or gang stalking being a preemptive measure to stop them from doing something heinous. But again, there's always that possibility. Gang stalking is extrajudicial in nature, so its auspices are speculative. But in the grand scheme of things, it should be noted, and indeed it has been noted by me, your host, Emmanuel Isaiah Smith, that gang stalking is essentially a bunch of grown adults playing dress up. Okay, look at it as an adult version of Halloween, right? We all know what Halloween is, right? It's when kids put on costumes. They're playing dress up. All right, boys dress up like their favorite superhero or someone else they admire. Little girls dress up as fairy princesses or some other cartoon character that they admire. And they go door to door with a chaperone present, knock on doors, and they ask for candy from people as an American tradition. And ultimately, when you talk about playing dress up, imagine gang stalkers getting up out of bed every morning, looking at themselves in the mirror and say, you know what? I'm going to go out into the streets today and act like Clint Eastwood. Or you know what? I'm going to go out into the streets today and I'm going to act like I'm John Wayne. Or you know what? I'm going to go out into the streets today and I'm going to try to act like Charles Bronson. 3 top-notch actors, 3 guys who played tough guys in movies, 3 guys who obviously motivate gang stalkers to act as they do. Now, I just had a stalker walk up with his girlfriend and put out a cigarette somewhere, listen to a few words, and walk off. That's the reaction I want, ladies and gentlemen. So the Gangstalking in Action live video series is doing its job. These stalkers are not approaching me and hovering over me. They're now walking their butts off somewhere else. That's what I want. All right, so let's get back into the lecture. You got these grown stalkers running around playing dress up. They're going to go out into the world and act like their favorite cowboy today. So who's your favorite cowboy, ladies and gentlemen? There are lots of them. I haven't watched a lot of cowboy movies in my day, but I think James Cagney movies were okay. All right. Ultimately, ladies and gentlemen, you got guys getting up out of bed, going out into the streets and saying, hey, you know what? Today, I'm going to be like Shane the Cowboy. I'm going to wait on my signals. I'm going to follow them to a T. And I'm going to tick off, annoy, harass, or attack anybody I want to with no recourse. Because we stalkers got all the angles figured out. We can take out the stresses of this life on anybody we want to. All we got to do is wait on the signal. All right, gang stalking is social engineering. It's state sponsored. It's a botched national security and intelligence program. And it results in the mobilization of any number of persons who got out of bed this morning and said, you know what? I'm going to try to act like that guy from Starship Troopers today. I'm just going to go out on an adventure. And I'm going to try to act like some kind of superhero today. I'm going to go out and wait on signals and track down anybody I can and pester them any way I can, including disease or germ spreading. I got a little bit of a cough right now. I think I might spread it around. I may walk up to somebody and talk to them real close, right in their face, so that the bacteria from my breath will go into their nostrils and contaminate them. Not because I want to, but because I got a signal coming. And that means I got fellow stalkers waiting on me. And we can do whatever we want to do because we're a brotherhood and we look after each other. And we're all partners in crime. We're all partners in this struggle that we do called clandestine gang stalking. And we can get away with it too because it's state sponsored. And all the signals we get are directly from the state. And when I say the state, I mean the United States of America, the federal establishment. All right, if I'm talking about Florida, I'll say the state of Florida. But when I just say the state, I'm talking about the federal establishment. So you got these weasels, con mans, hucksters, punks, thugs, and useful idiots that use gang stalking's protocols. They have slick ways of calling for people's death. And we're going to make that a component of this lecture today. Domestic terrorism. How do gang stalkers call for people's deaths without calling for their death verbally? Well, let's talk about these weasels the way weasels ought to be talked about. Yeah, gang stalkers call for people's deaths in a wide variety of ways. And it's not verbal. Why? Because if you call for somebody's death verbally and it's heard, you could go to jail for conspiracy to commit murder. If you try to call some bozo and offer him any number of $100 bills to go out and kill somebody, and you're found out, you could go to jail for murder for hire. Or attempted murder for hire, which is essentially conspiracy to commit murder. You got some people in this country, ladies and gentlemen, that are just so full of hate that they just can't function unless they get the opportunity to kill somebody. It doesn't matter that he's married. It doesn't matter that he's got a job. It doesn't matter that he's got a degree. It doesn't matter that he's a church-going boy. It doesn't matter that his home life is adequate. It doesn't matter he lives in a nice neighborhood. It doesn't matter that he sends his kid to a nice school. That's not enough for a gang stalker. That's not enough. Gang stalkers like blood. The blood of others. Gang stalking allows people who practice gang stalking to injure, maim, or kill other people without punishment. That's the allure of gang stalking. You get to commit crimes with impunity. All you gotta do is wait on the damn signal. When you wait on the signal that's given to you by another stalker, that's how you know your actions are safe. That's how you know there are no police around. That's how you know that you can get away with this crime that you so desperately want to commit. Think of a person who is so obsessed with another person that they want to find a hidden way to claim that person's life. What kind of weasels has the earth spawned to accommodate such behavior from what is supposed to be the most intelligent species on earth? Humans. No live and let live. No civil rights, no civil freedoms. No constitutional rights, no constitutional freedoms. No civil liberties. No inalienable rights. All that's out the window when you find yourself in a clandestine gang stalking campaign. You are supposed to be at the mercy, and I say supposed to be, at the mercy of your stalkers because they are judge, jury, and executioner to you. Yeah, it's gang stalking. Yeah, it's hate stalking. Yeah, it's community harassment. Yeah, it's domestic terrorism. Why is it domestic terrorism? Are the gang stalkers blowing up buildings? Are they carrying out mass attacks? Yes. 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 This cabal of American citizens across the demographic spectrum, across the socioeconomic spectrum, and of every tax bracket have learned a clandestine communication mechanism, a clandestine disruption mechanism, a clandestine auto accident mechanism, a clandestine vehicular homicide mechanism, a clandestine disease spreading mechanism, a clandestine workplace mobbing mechanism, a clandestine personal disruption mechanism, a clandestine burglary mechanism, a clandestine vandalism mechanism, a clandestine cheating mechanism for persons who have to take a lot of academic tests. Those stalkers will help you cheat your way up out that class with an A. It's a clandestine intimidation mechanism. It's a clandestine harassment mechanism. It's a clandestine pestering mechanism. It's a clandestine annoyance mechanism. It's a clandestine aggravation mechanism. All of it is state sanctioned. How did this come about? Well, this is what happens when you have boys who grow into men, but they never become men. They're men in body, but they're still boys or children in their personalities. You give them all this weapons technology. You give them all this surveillance technology. You give them all of these narratives to work with. You give them all of these people who will do whatever they say. What are these boys going to do? They're going to wreak havoc. They're not going to use this surveillance technology and all this military industrial grade weaponry to make society better. They're going to use the power of the state and the authority of the state to use all of this technology, all of this personnel mobilization, all of this military stratagem, all of these narratives, all of this power, all of this know-how. They're going to use it to disenfranchise people, to discriminate against people, to carry out acts of violence against people, to carry out acts of hate against people. Men, women, and children. They're going to use it to carry out acts of revenge against people. You got somebody from 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 25 years ago that angered you or harmed you in some way, or maybe a loved one. You want to get back at them? Well, plug into a gang stalking campaign and we can help you get back at your old enemy without anything coming back to you. Well, unfortunately for some of my stalkers, I found out exactly who it was trying to get revenge, and I've posted your butts on Facebook and called you out. How about them apples? How do gang stalkers call for the death of people? Well, here's how that works. Let's say you're a stalker and you want to get somebody killed. Why? I don't know. Maybe again, stalkers like narratives, they don't like evidence. So there might not be any real reason to kill anybody. Maybe they just want to kill somebody. I don't know. Maybe when that stalker and his wife were walking out of the grocery store, one of the wife's heels on her high heels broke, and she came crashing down to the ground, and some friendly bystander helped her up and maybe got a handful of her body while he was helping her up, and you took offense to that, and now you want that innocent guy dead because you didn't like the way he picked your wife up off the ground when her high heels broke. Or maybe your kid was running up a flight of stairs and some guy was running down a flight of stairs, and he and your kid collided, and your kid fell down on top of one of the stairs and scratched his knee, and you saw that. You want to treat the guy who collided into your kid as an assaulter or as a perpetrator, and maybe you took pictures of him after the incident and gave it to some stalkers. Maybe you got a picture of his vehicle and got his license plates, and you're saying, I want this guy killed because he knocked my kid down. He assaulted my child. Or maybe maybe you talk to somebody the wrong way. How dare he talk to me like that? How dare he talk to my wife like that? How dare he talk to my kid like that? You can't disrespect us like that. You can't use those kinds of words against us and in that tone. You don't deserve to live on this earth anymore. And I'm going to find a bunch of like-minded, weasel, sissy stalkers to find a way to kill you quietly, so that nothing comes back to us. And I work in the IT department of a major company, so money is no expense. All right, that's the way some of these goofball gang stalkers think. Or baby, you know what? This guy, he disrespected me 20 years ago. I want him dead. Or, this guy, he borrowed $20 from me back in 1989 and told me he was going to pay me back $30. And from that day to this, and that was 35 years ago, he still hasn't paid me back. I want him dead. That's the kind of trivial garbage that gang stalkers try to kill people over. And when the kind of schmuck that would allow himself to become a gang stalker gets in contact with other gang stalkers, he tells them what he wants to do. What do the stalkers say? Do they try to talk him out of it? No. They don't try to talk him out of it. They say, well, we don't have any evidence of what you're saying, but stalkers, we don't like evidence, we like narratives. You've given us a reason to assist you in your endeavor. We're going to help you take somebody's life. Here's how you read signals. And here's how you call for somebody's death. So gang stalkers have a system that they use when they want to call for somebody's death. So they use a system of essentially the same kinds of gang stalking tactics they use to pester people generally. It's physical gestures, it's vehicular maneuvers, and it's verbal commands. So I'm going to get into some specifics, so people know what to look for. What does it look like when a gang stalker, an undercover operative, or a gang stalking liaison attempts to call for somebody's death, right? They're letting surrounding stalkers and observers know, hey, I want this person murdered, or I want that person executed, or I want that person's life claimed of them. It would look something like this. So, a stalker who is a representative of the person who wants the murder carried out might be signaled to a targeted person or the person that is to be murdered. And they'll do something like flick a cigarette at them, or not directly at them to where it hits them, but flick a cigarette in their general vicinity. Or maybe they spit in your general vicinity. Or maybe they clap their hands very loudly in your general vicinity to make it sound like a gun clap. Or maybe they drive their car in such a manner to where it looks like they're trying to run you over at a high rate of speed. All right, the speed of that car is supposed to represent a bullet. Okay? Also, stalkers use this as a communicative signal that someone's to be killed. They'll drive past you really fast in a scooter of some kind. Possibly clad with a basketball jersey. Now, why do they choose basketball jerseys when they fly by you in the scooters? Now, this is something that a targeted individual has to train his or her eye to observe. Why do they drive past you in basketball jerseys when they're on their scooter or mopeds? Okay? The speed of the scooter or moped flinging past you at a high rate of speed, oftentimes at close range, nearly missing you, is supposed to represent the speed of a bullet. The basketball jersey is supposed to represent the word shooter. Okay? Shooting is the core component of the game of basketball. You must shoot the basketball into your hoop to get 2 points, 3 points, or 1 point, depending on if it's a inside shot, a three-pointer, or a free throw. When you talk about a shooter, in the basketball perspective, you're talking about someone who is shooting a basketball. But when you talk about it in the gang stalking narrative, you're talking about a shooter with respect to somebody who handles a firearm. So if you're a targeted individual and you got people trying to call for your death, and they're doing so with high rates, with vehicles that are passing by you at high rates of speed, and it doesn't have to be a car. It could be a scooter, it could be a moped, it could be a motorbike, it could be any number of vehicles. They drive past the target at a high rate of speed to resemble a bullet, and they might have something playing in the background, like maybe they have rap music playing in the background that is featuring a musician who has lost their life to gunfire. There are a lot of rappers over the past 30 years in particular that have lost their life to gunfire. Okay? So they might drive past you at a high rate of speed, and in the background they have music playing by a rapper who has lost their life to gunfire. And they may have basketball references somewhere on their body or on their car or on their scooter or on their book bag. That represents shooter. In gang stalking, basketball references mean shooter. And if they drive past you enough in enough places, and mind you, they can do this to you 100 times a day. These various clandestine or secret calls for your demise, they can do this to you, these stalkers, all right, these useful idiots, these degenerates, these hostile persons, these deleterious persons. They can do this to you dozens of times per day, okay, until their desired result is accomplished, okay? Now, you know, me personally, you know, I've seen all of the above happen. But another thing they like to do to try and illustrate that they want somebody harmed in the ultimate way is they'll come around you and use body functions like coughs or sneezes. The coughs or sneezes in your general vicinity are supposed to represent bullets. And they oftentimes do it to you in such a way to where, again, they try to be slick. They try to make it look arbitrary, but they're calling for your demise. You see, it's a way of not only spreading germs to you, but calling for your demise. They hope that other stalkers, operatives, and liaisons that see these gestures and verbal commands and so forth will understand this is who I want harmed. Now, I, your host, Emmanuel Isaiah Smith, would tell you if it were any different. But sometimes they say slick things to you in conversations out loud so that other stalkers will hear the cue, so that other stalkers will know this is the person I want harmed. This is the person I want shot. This is the person I want executed. Sometimes bicycles are used as sort of material euphemisms for murder weapons. Sometimes stalkers will, in the presence of other stalkers, ride a bicycle directly towards you at a high rate of speed. That high rate of speed is meant to resemble a bullet. Alright, I have seen gang stalking in heightened levels for the past 10 years. And I've seen gang stalking in various levels for the past 30 years. I can rest assured, ladies and gentlemen, and you can take it to the bank, that these various maneuvers and signals are supposed to represent gunfire. And also the honking of horns, as you just heard. That's another signal that I want this person harmed, particularly with gunfire. All right? When gang stalkers start honking their horns at targeted individuals, they are not doing so arbitrarily. They're doing so because there was a signal used to where that particular motorist was supposed to honk at that particular person at that particular split second. Yes, the honking of the horn is supposed to resemble projectiles. Right? Let me explain. Okay, when you push something like a horn and it causes a reaction, it's supposed to resemble the dynamic of pulling a trigger. And because the car is passing by you at a high rate of speed, which is supposed to resemble a bullet, that it can be reasonably concluded, particularly by a or a targeted individual who has become sensitive to these kinds of things, that there is some sort of a murder plot against your person. Now, I've contacted the FBI in various intervals over the past year about what I believe to be a murder for hire plot against my person and possibly against the person of my significant other, Lori, by persons who have originated in Miami-Dade County, Shaker Heights, Ohio, and Knoxville, Tennessee in particular. But I believe that there are actors in other states and counties that I've never been to that are colluding in this. It's not because I am a threat in any capacity to murder another person. It's because gang stalkers have this complex that they have power over life and death, and that they have the ability and the capacity to decide behind closed doors and behind the curtains and behind the scenes and in dark rooms who gets to live on this earth and who doesn't. And quite frankly, ladies and gentlemen, as part of the population control narrative of clandestine gang stalking, ladies and gentlemen, I oftentimes, with respect to domestic terrorism, I reference Timothy McVeigh, the mastermind behind the Oklahoma City bombings that killed 168 men, women, and children back in 1995 in Oklahoma City. Now, this man was found guilty, he was incarcerated, and he was executed after 6 years. And he killed 168. And that was considered an act of domestic terrorism because it all happened at once. 168 lives lost at once. Now, in my estimation, ladies and gentlemen, it doesn't take an act of terrorism that kills 168 people. All right, it doesn't take an act that cataclysmic, an act that catastrophic, an act that monstrous to be domestic terrorism. If you kill 168 people over a 10-year period, you're a terrorist. If you kill 1,000 persons over a 20-year period, you're a terrorist. If you kill 100,000 people over 100 years, you're a terrorist. You understand? Terrorism is not limited to one act that consumes the lives or property of many people. Gang stalking is domestic terrorism because it claims lives. It claims lives through the disease spreading. It claims lives through random attacks. It claims lives through gunfire. It claims lives through murder for hire. It claims lives through derived accidents. It claims lives through vehicular homicide. It claims lives through staged car accidents. It claims lives through illegal drugging of people. It claims lives from food contamination. It claims lives. And there's no telling how many tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of lives have been taken since 2011 in particular. At the hands of signaled, aloof, clumsy, or stupid gang stalkers. Now, me personally, I don't admire gang stalking. I don't think it's neat. I don't think it's fun. It's dangerous. And a lot of the people that participate in it are homicidal. They are violent. They are disgusting. And that's across the demographic spectrum, That's across the socioeconomic spectrum, and that's in all 50 states. I'm of the mindset that the Departments of Justice, the Departments of Defense, and the Congress, and the Supreme Court are all equally capable of stamping out gang stalking and rooting it out of the American legal code. It's obviously hostile undercover activity. All right? They are capable of stopping gang stalking. They're capable. They have to map out a strategy. They have to be diplomatic. They have to be decisive. And they have to be intelligent in rooting out gang stalking. It has no place in the American way of life. It has no place in a democracy. It has no place in a constitutional republic. It has no place in communist countries either. It also has no place in monarchies. To all the monarchies out there, okay, I hope sincerely that your time-honored tradition of having kings and queens and princes and princesses and earls and dukes and counts, barons and duchesses, I hope that continues in the interest of time-honored traditions and political stability, coupled with cultural identity and a strong sense of ethnic heritage. I don't want to see gang stalking happen in communist countries or monarchies either. It's my hope that the entire practice can be exposed for what it is, and that those responsible for the more violent elements of gang stalking can be prosecuted for it. All right? It is terrorism if you take large numbers of people's lives over decades. I do not doubt in the slightest that gang stalking has done that. This clandestine mobile personnel mobilization and signaling protocol that allows people to descend on other people, not only in the workplace, not only in people's communities or neighborhoods, not only in retail or other business establishments, but in people's own homes. All right, you got gang stalkers using microwave weapons and gamma ray weapons and X-ray technology and ultra low frequency weapons on other people while those other people are in their own homes, causing them aches and pains and discomfort and trouble sleeping. All right, gang stalkers are a weaselly, hostile, violent, aloof, and idiotic lot. And it doesn't appear that they have the common decency to stop, look at themselves in the damn mirror and say, what the hell am I doing? I got a wife and kids, I got a good job, I got this going, I got that going, I got a pretty good life. Why am I jeopardizing that so I can stalk strangers? All right? It is domestic terrorism, ladies and gentlemen. It's U.S. citizens causing catastrophic events in the lives of other U.S. citizens on U.S. soil. That's domestic terrorism. Oh, Lord have mercy. And these useful idiots, they come in droves. All right, they are a planned and strategic unit. All right, they are a unit, and they use military strategic formations to locate, confront, and disrupt their targets. They use military-grade surveillance and espionage equipment They use military-grade communication methods, covert communication methods. They use military-grade disruption mechanisms. Straight out of the CIA handbook. Now, that's not to say every CIA agent is involved in gang stalking. That's not even to say most CIA agents are involved in gang stalking. But a lot of its auspices and a lot of the way it works is derivative of CIA activity. And it doesn't appear that the operatives that are used in gang stalking campaigns are on the up and up. They don't appear to have anything worthwhile to do. It just looks like a bunch of grown men running around on scooters, bikes, vehicles, and on foot, looking for people to pester. Now, as I've said before, a lot of the undercovers and liaisons have these shadow units that follow them around to keep them safe. Because far be it from the realm of goodness for one of these liaisons or operatives to run into a target, rub him the wrong way, and get into some sort of a altercation with the guy, verbal or otherwise. A lot of these operatives and liaisons have these shadow units of gang stalkers that follow them around and point out potential targets to them. Okay, there's not a single liaison or operative that has not gone out into the field to observe or do whatever the hell they're doing out here in South Florida without a shadow unit constantly in their presence and constantly pointing out targets to them so that the operative knows who the targets are. These two-bit scumbag, dirtwad, jerk-off gang stalker types that like using secretive communicative mechanisms to try and get people harmed are pieces of shit. And I can call them that too. I can say that about them with a straight face. And not only over the airwaves, but to their damn face. It's domestic terrorism, ladies and gentlemen. Now, having said that, I'm going to have to bring up something that I've brought up in a number of other lectures. And that's my proximity to Cuba. Now, do I have Cuban Americans here in the United States, and particularly in South Florida, that are calling for harm to happen to me using a signaling mechanism? Yes. Is Cuba a terrorist state? According to the U.S. federal establishment, yes, it is. Are there Cubans here in the United States who work with terror cells? Yes. Is terrorism a part of gang stalking? Yes. Is the state of Cuba only 90 miles away from the United States? Yes. Are there Cuban governmental operatives in Miami-Dade County? Yes. Do any of them have terrorist ties? Probably. All right, is Emmanuel Isaiah Smith being listened to live right now by various third parties? Yes. Is he okay with it? Yes, I am okay with it. As I've said in previous videos, I don't mind being surveilled. I don't mind being watched. I don't mind being monitored. It would just be nice if the person's doing it, particularly if they're wards of the state, I would like them to do it with professionalism. That's all. Because all they're going to do is see the truth of what I'm talking about. All they're going to do is see hostile synchronization and gang stalking tactics against my person. They're going to see multi-leveled attack mechanisms on a scale that's never been seen before in the history of humanity. Have I ever threatened somebody's life? No. Have I ever knowingly intimidated another person? Nope. Have I ever gotten into a shootout or a fist fight with another person? Nope. Why? Because that's apish behavior. Do I affiliate with gang members or other violent persons? No. Never have. Why not? Because that's baboon-like behavior. It doesn't matter to me what your occupation is or whether or not you're a ward of the state. All right, I'm sitting here at a bus stop. I just had some Joe Schmo ride past me on an electric bike that's street legal. They're riding on a sidewalk on a bike that's street legal. All right? Let me tell you something about human behavior. Human depravity is a bottomless pit. There's no limit to the depths that a person will go to destroy the life of another person. It doesn't have to be called for, it doesn't have to be legitimate, and it doesn't have to be in self-defense. Persons born into this world have murder written in their DNA. But they also have nobility written in their DNA, justice in their DNA, and injustice in their DNA. It's the concept of good and evil. That's why we have millions of laws, probably hundreds of millions of laws on the books worldwide. And religion on top of those laws just to make people act right. Just to make them act civil. Just to make human beings act orderly. Okay, humans are naturally chaotic, and without rules and laws, they act in a chaotic way. What gang stalking allows people to do is act in a chaotic, violent, hostile, homicidal, or destructive way without getting into trouble. That's gang stalking's appeal, and the kind of person that would use gang stalking surveillance, monitoring, and disruption mechanisms, which are in many respects state-sponsored. You have to be a hostile, murderous, violent, hateful, and obstructive person in your soul. And like I said, gang stalkers don't like evidence, they like narratives. And they like pestering people and getting away with it. And they're cowards. They're cowards in their souls. All right, their soul has been tainted by the promise of being able to use state resources to harm other people. And it's a shame that the United States establishment, its government, has allowed this program to manifest in such a way, despite having these titles like democracy and constitutional republic. What kind of a deranged, maniacal nutcase hides behind a signaling mechanism to make the murder of another person more likely and less dangerous to themselves? A weasel. That's who. And I'm of the mindset that the only way to combat gang stalking is administratively. I'm not going to disrupt town hall meetings. I'm not going to disrupt congressional meetings. I'm not going to write off-the-wall letters to Congress people, senators, or federal politicians. I'm going to go right online to my audience, which probably includes persons who are of a political capacity, and let them know this is what we got in America. This is what's happening. And this is why it's unconstitutional. This is why it's barbaric. This is why it needs to stop. Are there churches involved in the lunacy? Yes. Why? Because churches have the capacity to place their interests above the interests of civil society in general. Because a lot of churches have become arrogant in their maneuvering. And they believe that they have power over life and death, a lot of them. And a lot of them will crack open a Bible and show you scriptures as to why it's legally and lawfully all right, spiritually and temporally, to carry out heinous acts against other people. All right, to the stalkers that participate in this madness, you are disgusting. Thank you for tuning in, ladies and gentlemen.